In the year 1268, Pope Clement IV passed away, and the cardinals assembled in Italy in the town where Clement had died. In today's world, the divisions between those on the right and those on the left are deep. But in 1268, the division between the cardinals from Italy and the cardinals from France were even deeper. The number of cardinals between the two countries were equally divided, and the question as to whether the future pope should be eating crepes or cannolis for breakfast was no small affair. As such, the papal election lasted not 3 days, not 3 months, but almost 3 years. And when the cardinals finally came to a decision in 1271, they elected somebody who was not even clergy. Teobaldo Visconti had to be ordained a priest and then elevated to a bishop before he could even be installed as Pope Gregory X. But as Pope, Gregory X realized the church could not go through that again. And so he convened the Second Council of Lyon and created new rules for the election of a pope, which included that the cardinals had to be physically secluded in order to force them to focus and speed consensus. All cardinals had to be in the same place to prevent external pressure or manipulation. There was no outside communication with the cardinals allowed. After 3 days without electing a pope, cardinals would only get 1 meal a day. After 8 days of not electing a pope, they would receive only bread, water, and, because they were both French and Italian, wine. Most importantly, the cardinals had to be locked in, secluded from the world, into the room with a key, cum clave, which is where we get the name we use today, conclave. Hi, my name is Father Tom Gibbons of Paulus Productions, and welcome to Candid Catholics. And our co-host is...
Hi, I'm Maggie McKay, and Father Gibbons and I know each other from St. Paul the Apostle in LA. And I am so happy to be here at your one-stop shop for open-minded conversation about Catholic questions, news, and ideology. So join us for season 1. It's all about conclaves and cardinals as we remember the legacy of Pope Francis and explore the process of selecting the next pope. So let's break down the basics, shall we, Father Tom?
That sounds great. Well, everybody, as we begin to talk about the ins and outs of conclave and what does that mean, the actual thing, not the movie, although given our backgrounds, we may dive into the movie a little bit during our conversation. We have another spectacular guest with us today. Sister Bernadette Reese is a Pauline sister who is with the Daughters of St. Paul. She's a former journalist with the Vatican Dicastery of Communication. I am a Paulist father. Sister Bernadette is a daughter of St. Paul. A lot of people, we both have both our communities have a strong focus on communications. And a lot of times we often get asked, are we part of the same community? And I say, well, we're not part of the same community, but we're cousins. So that's just kind of, we have so many great sisters of St. Paul that we've worked with and who've worked with us across the years. So we're so excited to have someone as knowledgeable and with such lived experience as Sister Bernadette. And so welcome, Sister.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Listen.
For the layperson in the crowd, what is dicastery?
A dicastery is basically a government ministry. So it would be a government ministry for the Vatican city-state.
Okay, good to know. So, Sister, let's dive right in. What does conclave mean in Latin?
Okay, so conclave, it comes from 2 words, cum clave, and literally it means with the key. So in the Latin languages, if you shut a door, you say chiudere. To say lock the door, you have to say chiudere con chiave, with the key. It means that is what means lock. So there were 4 times in the 13th century when the conclaves were going on so long that the lay people got involved and their voice was heard because they literally locked the cardinals where they were staying in order to push them to conclude the election. And it went on so long in Viterbo. It was the longest in history. It went on for 2 years, 9 months, and 2 days. They actually also took the roof off. And then it was, and to bake the cardinals, literally, in order to get them to give them a pope. So the lay people got involved in those conclaves in that way, and then literally forcing the pope who was elected after that almost 3-year-long conclave to initiate the conclave process that gradually evolved into what we know it today.
I have a quick question about that. I mean, is that the conclave where we actually got the name conclave? Was it referred to as a conclave beforehand?
No. So They began to refer to it as a conclave, kind of to distinguish it from the other types of settings where popes were elected before. So these were now taking place under lock and key, Conclave.
Sister, in the interim, after the Pope's death and before a new Pope is chosen, who's in charge of the conclave?
Okay, so there are 2 people who share responsibility, basically. We've already seen them in action. So there's the Cardinal Dean. It's an elected position, which is right now held by Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re. And interestingly, Pope Francis accepted an extension to his 5-year term only in February this year. Wow. So we see the Cardinal Dean primarily in liturgical functions. So he presides at the funeral mass, he'll preside at the mass to elect the Pope, and then he's involved with the rites around the conclave. The conclave takes place within a very liturgical setting, actually. So we'll see him several times in the conclave process. The other person is the Cardinal Camerlengo, currently held by Cardinal Kevin Farrell. He's the cardinal. He presides over what we call the apostolic chamber. And he carries out the office of safeguarding and administering the assets and temporal rights of the Holy See. So he will be overseeing the general congregations that are taking place now. And in those general congregations where the cardinals are gathered, and then there'll be particular congregations once the conclave starts. If there are urgent matters to be decided, he's the one that leads that process.
So what is the Holy See?
It's a good question. So you have the Vatican City State. The Holy See is the structure kind of behind that is the place of reference for the Catholic Church. So Vatican City State is the juridical state, you might say, where relations with states and things like that take place. The Holy See is what we reference as the entity that all Catholics belong to, and the Holy Father being the bishop of that see or diocese.
Okay. And, I know a lot of times we, I think in popular parlance, a lot of times we mix up bishops and cardinals.
Okay.
And there's a very strong Venn diagram there. Like they certainly overlap. But,
okay.
You don't need to be a bishop to be a cardinal. And not all cardinals are bishops. So, like, what is a cardinal and how is it distinct from a bishop and all that?
So this is a really good question. So bishops is a juridical or jurisdictional matter. Okay, so a bishop would have legal jurisdiction over a territory or over an office in Rome, for instance. Whereas a cardinal it's a papal appointment, as bishops are too, but it's a papal appointment to be an advisor. And it wasn't until John the 23rd that cardinals had to be appointed bishops. So, for example, Cardinal Newman, John Henry Newman, was not a bishop. But John the 23rd stipulated they had to become bishops first. But recently, with some of the elevation of some men to the College of Cardinals, for example, the papal preacher was one of the latest. They do usually then become bishops first, and they're more honorary, most of them over 80. But there have been some who've obtained a dispensation not to become bishops, but generally they're the ones that are over 80, so wouldn't be participating in the election of a pope. So cardinals are in an advisory role to the Pope. Most of them would be heads of Vatican Dicasteries, and then heads of principal dioceses throughout the world. So they're helping the Holy Father keep a pulse. And then I believe it was Paul VI who also stipulated that all of the patriarchs of the Eastern Rite churches automatically become cardinals.
Okay.
I'm so glad you asked that, Father Tom, because I literally was at, I think it's a Platinum Jubilee. Is that right, Sister? 70 years being a priest?
Yeah.
And the bishop was there, but I couldn't tell whether he was the bishop or the cardinal or what, because he had the hat that the bishops wear, but he took it off, took it on, then he had the red. So thank you for clarifying that. I should know after so many years of
No,
Catholic
that they
school.
even dress differently. So the next time, the code is scarlet red is cardinals.
Oh.
And kind of a violet magenta is bishops or monsignors.
Okay.
But the monsignor doesn't wear the beanie.
Okay. Is there a list of requirements or criteria that the cardinals are keeping in mind when they're voting? Is age a factor?
That could be a factor. We had a really long papacy with John Paul II, and I think we began to understand why papacies maybe should not be that long. But that may be one factor, but other factors would be ability to communicate, for instance, or the ability of someone to actually gain consensus, for instance. You know, what is their prior experience that they're bringing to the table? You know, so there's an awful lot. Theological backgrounds, you know, some have come from canon law, as we've seen. John Paul II was a philosopher, followed by Benedict, who was a theologian, not in an original sense, but he was able to synthesize in such an incredible way. And we've just had a pastor. So depending on the times that we're in, it calls for a different skill set, you might want to say. So that's what they're discerning now.
You know, I remember John Allen wrote this book. I'm sure you read it. It was, I just remember like the very beginning of the book. It was All the Pope's Men, I think it was.
Yes.
And I just remembered from that was the job of Pope is so big that no one person could do it. Like you said, Benedict was such a great mind and a great theologian. Francis was a pastor, and different people are going to be bringing different things to the table. And there's, you know, I think there's, you know, sometimes there's this expectation that someone's going to bring everything, all things to all positions. And it's just like, no, we're going to be getting different flavors and different emphases. And I was talking with somebody else in our community. He says, you know, one of the things I think is helpful for the job, so to speak, is ability to speak multiple languages.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think Francis spoke Spanish very well. He spoke Italian well. But I mean, English was a struggle for him, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, he only had 3 months study in Ireland for English, yeah. And it was hard to understand him when he read English.
Yeah.
How long does the conclave take generally? I mean, I guess it's different every time, but what's the average length?
Well, according to the last 10 conclaves, it's been about 3.2 days. Both Pope Francis and Benedict, the last two popes, were elected in the afternoon of the first full day after the conclave started. But there are stipulations actually in the guidelines to help that process move along. So if there hasn't been anyone elected after the first 3 days, Pope Benedict actually created a norm where after those 3 days, you would have a day of suspension. They would listen to a spiritual exhortation by the senior cardinal deacon and carry out informal conversations. Go back for 3 days of voting or 3 ballot periods. And if they still don't have someone, then they continue that process with a reflection by the senior cardinal priest. If they still don't have one, then a reflection by the senior cardinal bishop. Hopefully that won't happen. But if they still don't have anyone after that whole process, then there's a runoff between the top two, and those top two candidates cannot vote. But it still needs to be a 2/3 majority So after that set period of time, it comes to an end. They've got to make a decision. So there can never be a tie because of the 2/3 majority that always exists, even if they have to do a runoff.
And do they still do, Father Tom, you and I were talking about this, after so many days, they give them less meals? Is that true?
I haven't heard of that. Although at one time, yes. I mean, in Viterbo, they limited what they were eating to bread and water at a certain, I mean, they tried everything.
Hurry it up.
Yeah, but the way the regulations go now, I don't think that,
That's good.
yeah.
Why is there an age restriction on voting? You have to be under 80, right?
So actually, it was Paul VI. That's a pretty recent introduction. So Paul VI in 1970 established that cardinals over the age of 80 were not eligible to vote. And the reason that he cited was so that elderly cardinals wouldn't have the burden of traveling to Rome. So that may be revisited as travel has gotten easier, even from 1970. So, you know, it's an act of discipline. It could change.
Why the Sistine Chapel?
Yeah, so, you know, it hasn't always taken place there because the Sistine Chapel was built in the 1400s. But the first conclave that took place there was in 1492. And then since 1878, it's consistently been used as the place for the conclaves. And the regulations that are used right now come from John Paul II. His reason is that the act of electing a pope is a sacred act. And so it needed to be carried out in an appropriate setting, basically with dual purpose. One would be that it could easily be used for liturgical ceremony, but secondly, also for juridical formality, which is definitely what's taking place during the actual voting process. But also that the electors could more easily dispose themselves to the inner movements of the Holy Spirit. And I mean, you can think, and you know, we saw this recently in a simulated version in the conclave, but as the person makes an oath, every time they put their ballot in that, they're standing in front of an image of the general judgment. In other words, one day you're going to be judged. And so it's highly symbolic, not just abstract, but concretely, you know, with this huge image. But they're also surrounded by scenes of salvation history. I mean, the creation of Adam and Noah's Ark and all of those. But John Paul II also considered the Sistine Chapel to be conducive also for the awareness of the presence of God, in whose sight the people there would one day be judged. So basically, he decreed in the rule book that he wrote, that is the place to be used.
So, Sister, and this is from my personal experiences in the Sistine Chapel, during the conclave, do the tour guides who just repeatedly go, shh, do they stay to keep the cardinals down and keep their voices down?
You warned
like,
it
does
out.
that happen, or is it?
Well,
Yeah. That's my biggest memory of the Sistine Chapel, literally. Like, I spent my whole life trying to get there, and then it was just like, it's just all these tour guides just going, shh, shh.
yeah. Besides the crook in the neck.
Yeah, right.
I heard from watching Father Tom on KTLA that any cardinal who leaked information or whatever would just be excommunicated. Like, they are not messing around. Is that the way it goes?
It's not just any cardinal. It's even the staff that's involved. I mean, there's a number of people on staff. It even goes to florists, for instance. The sacristans who are there, the people on the elevators who might be bringing, because the elevators in the Vatican Palace are manned by someone who takes you up and down, generally. Mm-hmm. Anyone who hears anything is sworn to absolute secrecy, and it is under penalty of excommunication. That's also a fairly new norm, but it's absolutely necessary so that the cardinals are free, in a sense, to be able to continue conversations if they need to, or if someone comes around a corner and may have heard something, that what they've said will be kept in confidence.
Oh.
Yeah. even the servers, the waiters that are serving them, there's a lot of people who have to be involved to keep that machine,
Would you love to
and
be
that
one of the
machine.
waiters? I'm sure they're not talking about important stuff while they're being served dinner, but it would be fun to be in there. In
Yeah,
some capacity.
the fly on the wall.
So the cardinals are mostly appointed by the Pope, Pope Francis. Who are the other 20% made cardinal by?
Well, they would have been made cardinal by Benedict, and some of the older cardinals who are not eligible to vote may have also been appointed by John Paul II, even. I mean, there are some cardinals in their 90s, so even Cardinal Giovanni Battista Reis is 94, I believe. So those are the three popes that we're probably dealing with who appointed cardinals who are still alive today. The voting cardinals would be limited to Pope Benedict and Francis, though, I believe.
I've kind of had like a pet theory a little bit that I'm wondering if the retired cardinals, so to speak, are going to have a little bit more of a role than they normally would in this conclave, just because there are so many there are so many cardinals from all over the world who don't know each other, and so I'm wondering like what kind of I can see what kind of like maybe guiding influence or whatever kind of influence. I mean, obviously they won't be expressing a vote, but I can see where they'll be, like maybe helping shepherd the voting cardinals along either through their own past experiences or their own personal priorities or whatever.
Yeah.
Can you like talk about that? Like,
Yeah, I can see that taking place right now in the general congregations and the informal conversations. But once the conclave starts, even they are not allowed access to the voting cardinals. But I believe you're right. I'm sure there are some younger cardinals. I mean, some of them newly appointed who are very young, younger than me. This is a first. May be asking for advice. And I would. It's, grace builds on nature, but also we learn from each other in experience when we don't have it, So I can see that taking place. But we also have to remember that those cardinals would actually still be eligible to be voted for.
oh, interesting. Yes,
Yeah,
it does. Because to
so-
be pope, there's no age restriction for pope.
There's no age restriction for pope. I mean, the last two popes, one was 78, one was 76, if I'm not mistaken, Francis
Yeah.
and Benedict. And there's no stipulation that the pope be elected from among the cardinals who are electing or from even among the College of Cardinals. What is stipulated is that they vote for who they consider to be the person best suited for the job. So I can try to find that.
Well, I think it was we'll talk about that in that earlier story, but, that super long conclave, they elected somebody who was a layman to be Pope, Gregory X.
Yes.
Where he had to actually be ordained a priest and then installed as a bishop before he could be installed as a pope.
Yeah. And that was the par for the course. I mean, St. Ambrose was.
Right.
So, I mean, and in the beginning, the church was still evolving, especially in these areas. And so the people would acclaim who a bishop would be. And that's kind of how it took place in Rome as well, because it was the Bishop of Rome. The idea of the papacy as we have it today came much later. Although, primacy was held by the Bishop of Rome, the understanding of a papacy that we have today evolved tremendously, especially through the Middle Ages. The 13th century, we begin to have that conclave because they were running into so many difficulties as monarchs wanted to get in on the act. So, I mean, you think, later in the 16th century when Charles V, imprisoned the Pope. Well, if monarchs were still involved in electing the Pope, I mean, how many people would have accepted becoming a Pope knowing that you could be imprisoned by an emperor who didn't like you? So somehow rules had to start being made as the church and society evolved. But yeah, they're to give their vote to the person who, in their judgment, is most suited to govern the universal church in a fruitful and beneficial way. That's the quote from the document Pope John Paul II wrote.
Where
Now,
did-
generally, because it's a bishop of Rome, it would have to be someone who could become a bishop. Therefore, it has to be a man. But other than
Naturally.
that, there's no stipulation.
Where do the cardinals stay while they're sequestered?
So the cardinals stay in what's called the Domus Sanctae Martyr. It's a residence that, if any of you have visited the Vatican, so Paul VI hall, where all huge audiences take place, the synod took place there, to the colonnade on the left side of the Vatican Basilica, if you're looking at the Basilica from St. Peter's Square. It was built by John Paul II, specifically for use of the cardinals during the conclave. Before the quarters where they were staying were horrible. So he actually built, it looks exactly like a hotel. Okay, so it's got 2 wings, 5 stories each. There are 105 suites inside of it, along with 26 other rooms and a reception area. They have a nice dining hall there. Some of you may have seen the Chapel of the Holy Spirit, which is where Pope Francis celebrated Mass during lockdown. And it has a nice triangular type roof with Veni Sancte Spiritus on it. So some of you may have seen that. So that will be a place of prayer now. So you can all visualize where the cardinals may be going to pray when they're not actually in the Sistine Chapel. So
What do they use that place for when they're not doing a conclave?
during the year, a lot of priests who work in the Vatican live there. And people can have guests there. So if there are extra guest rooms, cardinals who may be visiting could find a room there. And of course, Pope Francis chose to live there during his time as Pope rather than living in the Apostolic Palace, where the papal apartments generally were.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because, of course, I'm sure you and I both get the question about Conclave, the movie Conclave, a lot. And that was one of the things that threw me. I was just like, oh, why is Ralph's character going to the papal apartment where all the other cardinals? I'm like, oh, Pope Francis was doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So,
Yeah.
Can an elected cardinal decline and say, no, thank you?
Yeah, they do have that possibility. I haven't found any documentation, but it does seem that there are some people who do say that there have been people who've declined before. But yeah, it is a possibility. I think you'd have to have pretty good reasons. It seems to me that's a discernment par excellence in the church. But some of the people I've seen cited are Charles Borromeo and Robert Bellarmine, but there's no documentation. So, I don't know.
and I think it's kind of like how it is now. I mean, I think the only thing I feel safe in predicting is we're not going to have a pope by the end of the first day. Like, it's just one round of voting. I think it would be highly unlikely. And that there is a very human process of everyone sorting themselves out.
Yeah.
At some point, when I did a little research on this, the names are coming to me. At some point, maybe somebody says, take me off your list. You may want me, but take me off your list. They may pull like an LBJ, if nominated, I will not serve, or whatever the speech is,
Yeah, and we heard that coming out actually of the election of Benedict, that Pope Francis, Bergoglio, was also high in the running. And I think he spoke of this, but I could be wrong. I read so many things. But that he did ask his fellow cardinals to back Benedict. And that may have been something he was feeling within himself. But I've also been left with the question, because it was Pope Benedict who changed the rules for what happens if you can't reach a consensus, a 2/3 majority, about the runoff and the 2/3 majority. I'm wondering if that runoff could have been something in the back of his mind, that it could have happened based on the conclave that elected him.
Interesting.
And then hearing this story, because it is personal experience of various popes that did lead to the conclave rules.
Yeah.
So But, I think they really are seeking the unity of the church. And some of them may have valid reasons for saying, like, please decline from voting for me. They might have very personal reasons that they don't want to share with other people, And like you said, Father Tom, I think all of us who've had experiences in religious life and the way that voting takes place for certain roles, the first vote is always going to be like, okay, let's get some names up there.
Right.
And then you begin to see like a narrowing. Again, like you said, the Holy Spirit works through these human elements. I mean, we see it on the pages of Scripture. I mean, we would never think today of choosing the 12th apostle by lot. But that's what they did.
In the Diocese of Vegas, they would, but no, I'm just kidding.
In a modern context, yes. So the Holy Spirit blows where he wills.
Yep.
I should know this probably, but have the Cardinals been sequestered already, or is it only during the voting time? Like, how do they have the time to get to know each other and what they're about?
So that's what this pre-conclave experience has been like with the general congregations and everything, which also involves non-electing cardinals. So they've been getting to know each other in informal meetings, but also by hearing these 5-minute speeches that have been delivered in the general congregations, which, if we remember, is probably what elected Pope Francis. It was what he said in those 5 minutes about the church needing to go out, and that Jesus is knocking on the inside of the doors of the church, just wanting those doors to fling open. That basically caught some cardinals' attention. So that process is going on right now to help them then when they go behind those closed doors. But until that happens, I believe the actual sequestering starts tomorrow, but they need to claim their rooms, I think today, something like that. So, and actually the rooms are also drawn by lot. And it seems Cardinal Farrell is the one who does that. Again, he would be the one with the physical stuff of the conclave. He's the one who's been figuring out logistics, building, hiring cooks, and all that kind of stuff. Wow. So he's had his proverbial plate full.
Well, speaking of casting lots, being in Los Angeles, we are not that far away from Vegas. So if bookies were to call me, I'm not saying they have been, but if they were, I get the question a lot. I'm sure you do. Like, if I've got $20 burning in my pocket, not that we condone that kind of behavior. Of course, it's wrong. Well, I mean, at the same time, I mean, how much of our church is financed by bingo games too, but still.
Exactly. And Las Vegas nights.
Was that? Yeah, Las Vegas. Yeah, we've had those too. If one were to, do you have any names you could throw out, or I don't know? I've been getting that question.
For me, it's so difficult because this is really the first time I know a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's completely different when I know these men.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, I just can't go there.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think you bring up like a really great point in that, like, it's as much as we love to say this isn't about a horse race, there's only so much that the culture is going to insist. It's like, DraftKings is going to have its way. They spend too much money on advertising and stuff. Can you speculate, like, what's it like for some of these, without getting too personal or violating anything, but what's it like for some of these people to hear their name? Is it like, are they freaked out? Are they hopeful? Are they like, what? I mean, if I heard my name like associated with that, I'd be like, whoa.
Yeah, I think a lot depends on personality. At a certain point, I mean, the person who has to face that must have an immense amount of trust in their brother cardinals, but also in the Holy Spirit and in the vocation that's being entrusted to them. Initially, I think it would take some time getting used to, I would imagine, because it is a burden that none of us would want to put their hand up for. So I think there's some trepidation, but I really do believe in the gift of the Holy Spirit. Some may just know it's wrong from the very beginning, like that's not what I'm called to. I would have a hard time with the expectations.
Yeah.
a lot of expectations and just not feeling up to it, But we did hear Pope Francis talk about the gift he was given, and everybody who knows him say he was quite the introvert. So the fact that he just felt this gift come upon him that actually made him the interactive person that we knew and that we saw come to life, especially on apostolic journeys. He was, in a crowd, he was just so different. And we doing the commentaries always noticed that.
That is really funny that you said. I did not know that about Pope Francis, that he can say. I knew that about Benedict. I knew Benedict was very much of an introvert.
Yeah.
But Francis, I felt like, whoa, like every time he saw a baby, he was like a politician. Not that he was doing it politically, he was doing it for real blessing, but you're just like, you could, speaking of betting, you could have like a betting on like how many babies is he going to kiss today at St. Peter's Square. What's the over and under? Because, he was just, it's really funny that you say that, because I just always assumed he was an extrovert just by the way he always just conducted himself. When the cameras were on, but of course we're not always who we are when the cameras are on. But,
yeah. Sister, of course, a lot of people saw Conclave before Pope Francis passed away, but the day after, it shot up to something like 200% more viewers than usual. Did that movie get anything wrong as far as the process?
I was one of them who saw it as soon as I haven't seen it
before or after.
Yeah, I saw it both before and after. Now,
okay.
There's a few things that factually it got wrong. So it confused or amalgamated the roles of the dean and the Camerlengo in the Ralph Fiennes character, which, Hollywood license, that's fine. An in pectore cardinal ceases to be a cardinal on the death of the Pope, even if it's revealed in his will. So an in pectore cardinal would never be allowed in a conclave, never. So they got that hugely wrong. Okay.
What's an in pectore cardinal?
Thank you.
It's a cardinal that's made, in pectore is the heart or the chest. So it's a secret cardinal that the Pope makes. Now, some of these took place, for example, behind the Iron Curtain. There were some cardinals who were in pectore. So they were advisors to the Holy Father, but secretly so that they wouldn't be harmed in any way. And then some of them, it was revealed like on their deaths and things like that. So it's a cardinal made in secret. We have no clue if there might be some in China, for instance. Now that's speculation on my part. Okay.
Yeah.
However, that ceases on the death of the Pope who created them in pectore. So, but the actual process is fairly well done, because I've looked at the rite of the conclave, and actually the book that's on the table, that color of the cover, I'm like, oh my God, that's what the book looks like.
Wow.
And all of the other processes, the holding up of the ballot, the walking up, the oath, putting it on the paten, turning it over into the urn, and then having the ballots read and the notes being taken, and then the string, that's all very, very realistic. Yeah.
Is there anything else that we should be paying attention to as we go into this? Here's one other one. Why is this important for everybody, not just Catholics? Obviously, for Catholics, it's important, but why is it important for everybody? There's so much attention around this.
Well, it's important for everyone because the Holy Father is the leader of the largest number of people on this God's earth, and the moral leader of even more. Okay, so when the Pope speaks now, it hasn't always been that way, but when the Pope speaks now, the world listens. His latest encyclicals, Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, which were huge clarion calls, not only to us as Catholics, but to all people in the world on things that affect everyone in the world. So, no, this is something for all of us to be highly tuned into, especially through prayer. That's how we participate now, is through our prayer. Praying for the men who are in there, praying that we might also be docile followers of Christ, who provides us with a vicar through whom he will act in a special way as a sign of his presence here on earth. and that we, are able to see that. We need good leaders. The world so needs figures like that right now, that we can believe that what they say is, even about
Yeah.
themselves, we so need that. And this could be the last position on earth that we can turn to for something like that.
Sister, what are you personally hoping to see in the next pope?
I'm hoping to see someone who would be able to carry out Pope Francis's synod on synodality. So I'd like to see someone who would be able to pick that up and continue with it. That's really the only thing that I have a hope for. Because number
And
one,
what is the Synod on synodality?
I
That's
didn't
the
wanna
big
ask.
question I get all the time.
Synod.
What's the Synod? What's a Synod? What's a Synod on synodality?
This is my definition. It was Pope Francis' attempt to carry out the last implementation of Vatican II, which was the inclusion of the laity. That's how I'm seeing the Synod on synodality. So in the bringing on of the laity, he's trying to bring us back to the experience of the early Christian community when they were grappling with how they were supposed to live their Christian lives without Jesus, without that authority figure. So he wants to bring us back there, and every baptized member of the faithful are invited to the table in different roles in order to discern God's will, not just the clerics. That may have been necessary at a certain time when they were the only people who were educated, and there were thousands and thousands of priests. That's no longer the case. Our bishops need help, and it is a way of allowing the laity to become 100% involved in the church, not only in society where their realm is 100%, but also in the management of the church, in the direction of the church. Again, in the various roles that we do believe need to be there in order to preserve, especially a discernment process, in certain sacramental things that we go through in order to receive certain gifts from the Lord, namely that of orders. But how can the laity be more involved with that process, and what ministries can laity be involved in with such a shortage of priests? So this is everything that the Synod on synodality is looking at. How can we even allow various cultures to express the faith, putting their own millennial old cultures in dialogue with the gospel in order to continue understanding who God is from all the various cultures on the earth. So these are all things that have been set in motion by Pope Francis' Synod on synodality.
So when a decision is made, what happens next?
So once a decision is made, there's quite a number of steps to it, actually. This will involve the junior cardinal deacon, actually, which is the newly emeritus prefect of the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue. He's from India, and he's the junior cardinal, and he will then ask the secretary of the College of Cardinals and the master of papal liturgical celebrations, Archbishop Diego Ravelli, he's going to go and call them back to the Sistine Chapel. And then the Cardinal Dean, again, Cardinal Reis, because this is a liturgy now, will ask the person to consent. Do you accept your canonical election as Supreme Pontiff? And then the person has a chance to reply. And then the next question that the Cardinal Dean poses is, by what name do you wish to be called? And it's actually that master of papal celebrations who acts as notary. And we've seen him acting as notary in the funeral process and things like that. And then there's a moment of prayer, after which the cardinals will then pay their respects. The Pope is then also allowed a period of time. He will vest. And then from the balcony of St. Peter's, a lot of us have this in our memory, the senior Cardinal Dean, who right now is Cardinal Dominique Mamberti. He's the prefect of the Apostolic Tribunal, will present the Pope to everybody in St. Peter's Square. And basically the formula is, I announce to you a great joy. We have a Pope, the famous Habemus Papam. And then they will reveal who that person is. Hopefully by that time, all the cell phone stuff will be lifted. When I was there in St. Peter's Square 2013, we could not call out on our cell phones. Cell phones were still all jammed. So it took us a while to figure out who had been announced, because the sound system wasn't that great. I mean, it was a comedy of errors, actually, for us in the
Do
in the
people camp
square.
out there? Like, do they wait days?
Well, no, what
just-
usually happens is you kind of figure out, so we'll know if they do a vote tomorrow, because the Cardinal Dean will ask if they can proceed for a vote tomorrow evening. We'll kind of figure out when the 2 ballots are done by how much time elapsed until we see smoke. So people will generally start to arrive there at the time when you think they'll see smoke. So I think it was around 5:30 p.m. And I think the smoke started billowing out around 6.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Good timing.
yeah, and then
Well-
literally when it was announced, people left their cars on the Lungo Tevere, the street along the Tiber, left their cars in order to rush to St. Yeah, it was it. But
I
it
bet.
was horrific. Yeah.
Well, then here's a follow-up question. I know you and I were talking a little while ago. You think this is going to be a longer conclave than normal?
Well,
Or than the past couple of conclaves anyway?
Yeah. It's hard for me to believe that they'll have chosen someone on the second day or the first full day of the conclave. Only because, I mean, you have a higher majority to reach, because there's 133 cardinals. There were 117 who elected both Benedict and Francis. So that's one factor. The second factor is there are so many new cardinals that were just added in November or December. And the 133 electors did not just arrive. Some of them arrived quite late. I mean, I was surprised at how late some of them arrived. But I mean, there could be visa situations, who knows? So anyway, I expect a little longer synod, but not that much longer.
Not 3 years.
Not even 3 full days. It'll probably be within the 3rd day, I think.
Within the 3rd day is your
Yeah,
expectation.
Yeah.
Well, I learned a lot. Thank you,
Oh my
sister.
goodness, me too.
You're
Me too.
welcome.
I've been pouring through like all these different research, and there's still like new things. So, thank you so much, sister.
You're
This
welcome.
was, I think like we're all kind of curious because it's such a new thing for all of us. We're used to seeing Kornacki at the big board when there's a presidential election
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
polls, but it's just like all that paradigm does not. Maybe
Right.
2% applies here, and the rest of it is just totally brand new.
Yeah.
So, thanks for unpacking this for us.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.
That was so entertaining
Yeah.
and informative and educational. Thanks for asking all those questions that I was thinking, but I didn't want to, I thought, oh, I should know those.
No, I didn't know those. And
Really? Okay, good.
No. I mean, this has been an education, I think, for everybody. I mean, this is something that only happens like once a decade, maybe, or even, like once every 2 decades.
Right.
I mean, in the 1970s, we had Pope John I, who was elected, and then 30 days later he died, so we had to do it all over again, and that's how we got Pope John II.
Sure.
But for the most part, no, of course we don't know these things because I didn't know them because we don't go through them every day, and I was just so grateful for Sister Bernadette because she had the front row experience.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for listening. And tomorrow the conclave begins. So check back and share on your socials at Candid Catholics, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll break it down some more and make sense of the conclave, who the cardinals are, and more.